Hey, Joanne, thank you for coming in today. You have just a tremendous background in leadership with so many different companies like IBM and Cisco and investments, and also with the largest uh, technology organizations in the world like IEEE. So we want to mine all of that, including your degree in engineering that you got very early on. So we'll start with sort of very early, and we'll progress through your career to what you're doing now, and some really exciting things that you're launching, like the entrepreneurship program that you're sharing with IEEE. So, again, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for the invitation, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be doing this with you.
So, Joanne, I actually monitor, who my audience is. So, the top five roles of my audience are founder, CEO, co-founder, president, board of directors, and then it gets into people like professors, engineers, and investment professionals. But even in the top five, those executives typically are investors too. So there's a big investment
Correct.
sort of feel to my audience, a very senior. But they're always curious, what are these, 2 to 3 magic inflection points that made this wonderful professional life and career that you have today? And it could have been something that when you were 3 or 5 years old, or something in your family, could have been a mentor, things that happened in school. What were those amazing moments that shaped this tremendous person you are today?
Yeah, so when you talk about inflection points, I guess it can be coming from a variety of sources, as you mentioned, as you go through the journey of life, as a matter of speaking, in your career, professional career. So if we start back, like you mentioned, like I'm an engineer by training, and also I'm part of the order and everything of that sort. And so I guess an inflection point there is the love of science and math. And that's what triggered, hey, and the beauty of engineering, they encompass that, but always look at problem solving and how do you approach a situation or a problem, and what kind of solution can be, let's say, obtained from this from a scientific perspective. And that's the beauty of engineering. And I remember when and in engineering you can go into multiple fields. It's just wide open of what you can do. And I would say, fortunate enough, when I graduated, I got hired by IBM Microelectronics division to be a manufacturing engineer. And I say that was almost like a foundation of what I'm doing today, because it made me understand of how computers were made, and from scratch, from the design to the actual, let's say, what you put the into the computer room type of thing. And as we're working I'm part of, as a partner of Reds Capital, and as we're working with startups who have this of looking at, let's say, from a hardware perspective, what they're looking at, what they want to do, you always look at the manufacturability. You can always design something that's the world's greatest chip, but if it's not manufacturable, it means nothing. So it's like, how do you bring the research part, the design part, and the manufacturing, and bring it all together? And as an engineer, that is the foundational element of an engineer, to be able to cross all these different elements of a product cycle. And it culminates. So just from working as an engineer at IBM, then eventually moving into sales and marketing. And I ended up following various corporate roles at the at HP of the world, the Cisco of the world, and the SAP. And you get a good foundation of also what makes a company ticks, of how a company grows, because you've got different divisions and everything that sort. And as we work at Reds with all these different elements, with our startups and the community of the ecosystem, you can be an advisor, give them some help, mentor some of them, and help them grow. And this culminates well also in my role as chair of IEEE Entrepreneurship. And IEEE is the largest professional organization in the world. They have over 400, about 430,000 members worldwide. And from this, it gives me an aspect of a global outlook, because what works in one region doesn't necessarily mean it'll work in another region. I'll give you an example. Right now, we're in the process of building a hard tech venture summit, and that works in US, Canada, probably Europe. But as I talk with my colleagues in Middle East Africa or Latin America, they said, no, that wouldn't work for us. Our focus is on AI. and we don't have many hard tech engineers or companies here. So every inflection point, as you say, it leads to another inflection point through life and my career, and it brings me to the point where I am today, where you culminate all this experience to be helpful as much as possible to our startup portfolio, but also the community of large, especially the engineers.
So you indicated you had an early interest in science. So was that sort of a natural curiosity about science, or did your family sort of guide you in that direction, or maybe a mentor of some sort? And did it start really early, like pre school?
I guess, well, from a family perspective, my parents were immigrants from China. And so there wasn't necessarily that scientific intuition from that perspective, but they always encourage education's most important, to get that university degree. And the science culminated just from, I guess, high school teachers. And you find that I had a love of the math. The math was always strong, and also chemistry. And the combination of chemistry, the biology, and the physics, it was just in there. It just sparked an interest. It's the curiosity of, why does this happen? And there's a reason behind it scientifically. And it's that the curiosity, the curious mind. How do you keep going and keep going? And after, and say, okay, if this works there, why can't it do this? And you go and extend it and extend it. And then it ended up, let's say, in engineering school. And the beauty of engineering is that, okay, you keep that curiosity, but then it brings it to the business corporate world. So if this is happening, hey, how can this work in industry?
So when you studied engineering, this was at McGill, and
Right.
um, you'd probably be in the minority in terms of the number of women in the program, right? At that time.
Yes. Yeah, women, and it still is today. There's not many women in engineering. Like, I've been part of an organization locally for the past 20 years of trying to encourage young girls to go into physical sciences. A lot of young girls go into the medical biological science, and we're trying to get a lot more to go into the physical science. And so usually it hovers under 20%. And that's also a reflection of the IEEE membership, where it's not a large percentage of women, where electrical engineering is due probably hovers between 5 and 10%. And so it is low numbers. And so hopefully over time, as being a mentor and advisor, is get the face out there, start talking with people, and just encourage young girls to go into science and engineering.
So you indicate then that you studied electrical engineering or industrial
No,
engineering?
no, no. I didn't study electrical, even though I'm a member of IEEE. I studied chemical engineering. And so the chemical engineering, it's interesting when I look back now on the foundation of chemical engineering, at where it came from. It came from mechanical and electrical, because all these are your basis of the engineering program was electrical mechanical, and then you all got these over time, the specialization that came, and they became an entity upon themselves. So we all learned the basic foundations of math, physics, okay, and then you just add on the other components depending on your engineering program.
So at that time, was engineering a 5-year program or a 3 or 4 year
It
program?
was it varied between from the universities. Usually it was about a 4-year program. I finished my program in 3 years, and I did a lot of studies during the summer, and because I was anxious to go work in industry, and just, let's complete degree. I want to make an impact working with companies, and so I finished my program in 3 years.
Well, that's quite remarkable. And McGill is one of the top schools, in fact, in the world, and
Yeah.
to hold a top ranking. So did you get hired by IBM right away, or what
Yeah,
was?
I got hired right away by the IBM microelectronics division there. And it was from there, I guess, it kind of opens the door to everything else. And you can see all the different components. And when I left IBM, I ended up working for HP, and I became more of a, I guess, a technical consultant, technical sales engineer. So I ended up working with chemical manufacturers, electronics manufacturers, engineering consulting firms. So the wide range, everything had to do with engineering and manufacturing. And it just exposed me to a greater variety of how IT or computers can help resolve issues and can help improve the bottom line of corporations.
So, okay, IBM and then HP, and I know Cisco's in there, but was there anything before Cisco or?
After HP, I worked in multiple divisions. I worked in their hardware division, and then I worked in their consulting firm. And then from there, I worked for SAP and also Cisco.
Right, and then with SAP, what did you do there?
So SAP, I was there as an education consultant, working with customers on how to implement their ERP systems. And that one brought a whole new element in the sense that you worked with multiple departments of a corporation to implement or ERP is huge, of a large software package. And it's never about the technology, it's about people and processes. Okay. And the technology has to work with the people and processes, especially the people, to make the system a successful implementation. And so and that's always challenging because you, as any large corporations want to or what not to, there's a lot of silos. And how do you bring all these elements together? So that was excellent.
And then in Cisco, what were your responsibilities?
So Cisco there, I had a couple of roles, but I started off as being their Canadian manager, responsible of their corporate social responsibility program of implementing a nationwide program on bringing networking curriculum to high schools and colleges and university across Canada. And at that time, we ended up having about 15,000 students on online curriculum across Canada. Worldwide, it was about over 1 million students that was on this. I think it's the largest online learning program. But what this also helped was for workforce development, because particularly hard hit is in IT and still is today, of having those key lack of the brains of making our let's say our portfolio companies, startups, any corporations successful in the IT world. And it doesn't mean that you have to work for an IT company, but you could be working, let's say, for a utility company, but they're implementing IT solutions. But you need a skilled workforce to do that. And part of Cisco's objective is how do we help that landscape from a global perspective? So I cover across Canada. And then eventually I end up reporting to the CFO of Cisco. I'm based in Montreal, Canada, reporting to Cisco Canada, the CFO in the strategic investment group. So I was one of his directors there of looking at innovation and how to bring this about with Cisco.
And then you got embedded into the deans of IT, which is the colleges, universities, and institute had a program where VPs of technology or computing science got together and they had this association. And you were involved with that Deans of IT program. They used to have a summit every year.
Right.
And in fact, I think you even provided funding for some of that as well.
Yes, we did. So at Cisco, that's what we work, because it's all part of the workforce development, addressing global needs, and also, let's say in particular, say within Canada. And it was working with the deans of IT within the colleges and also with the Canadian government to influence policy, saying this is a critical issue for the growth of the country. And how do we go about helping and making sure this happens?
Yeah, and then I guess you would have a role that the government, I don't know if they still exist, but there was sort of this pseudo government board which had industry on it, industry associations, they had colleges, universities represented.
Right.
Part of that as well.
Yeah, I was part of that sector council. I don't know if it still exists or they may have transformed to something else. So we built a couple of programs with this federal government program council and working on them on developing this type of workforce. And now that's interesting because now I just got brought in to be a board director of a not-for-profit that was a research and R&D center, but one of the local universities here with IBM and Teledyne DALSA. And they're looking at how to bring microelectronics from an economic development perspective within Canada. So it's gone from IT in general. Now I'm working with another group that's more from the electronics hardware side, a matter of speaking. And so it and the challenge is still there today on workforce development of getting skill qualified workforce. And with the work that I'm also doing with IEEE, it's a curious thing is that we have this problem in Canada and the States, but it's a global problem. There's not enough skilled workforce as the population ages and people are retiring. We need the backfill, and that baby boomer population was a large cohort that's gone through the system, but you need people to fulfill that afterwards. And how do you do that? And it's not a matter of replacing person to person, but it's leveraging technology to do some of the stuff that was redundant, that technology can be automated for some of those tasks, but you need the brains behind it to make that happen. And we see that with the startups coming in today, where they're bringing innovation of what we've seen with our with Red's portfolio companies and other startups, where they've brought this innovation into that corporations end up say, hey, this makes sense. Let's engage with them also, aside from customers.
How did you get involved with IEEE, and when did that engagement happen?
At the IEEE, I got engaged with them because, not being an electrical engineer, I'm a chemical. It was, I'll be upfront with you, it was one of Red's partner, Andy Chen, who's a formidable partner and was the former CTO of one of Canada's largest utility companies. And he's been a member of IEEE for 40 odd years or something that sort. And he became president of one of the societies of IEEE. And I said, look, always there to lend a helping hand. I said, look, if you need help, I'll help you out. And that's how I got engaged with IEEE. And then along the journey, being an investor, there was a new entity that was opening up in IEEE called IEEE Entrepreneurship. So I ended up connecting with that group. Yeah, we don't have any investors in our group. Come on in and let's see what we can build out. And then a few years later, I became chair. Now I'm in my third year of the mandate. And they extended, it's usually about 1 to 2 years. They extended it so that we get the entrepreneurship more prevalent globally. And so some of the things we started initiatives this year was really to outreach to our IEEE membership in Latin America, Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific, because that's where IEEE is growing the fastest. And that kind of makes sense from a population. There's great higher number of youth in those countries too. And is to connect with them. And one of the things that we're looking at is how to commercialize research, because there's a lot of innovation that's happening at the university level. And how do we outreach to the academic researchers? They could be the professors, or the majority are more the postdocs students and the PhD students. They've been working on these research projects, and is to give them avenues, that there's other avenues besides the tenure professor route. And to look at what you're building as a research is innovation. So, but is it a marketable product that can be developed? And like, I'll give you an example. We held, let's say, we had over 70 researchers come into Panama last year, and it was from 5 different countries. And one of the top researchers there, it was just amazing, his tech is using nanotechnology to regenerate bone. And especially this is helpful for osteoporosis, or anything happens after cancer that's been after treatment and everything that sort. And so it's looking, now we're working with him, some other volunteers at IEEE, working with him, how do we commercialize this? What avenues can be done? And at least he has a pathway and say, if this is what I want to do, here are the options. So you see all this that crops up. I remember locally, I was working with, he was a researcher at the engineering school in University of Montreal, and he built, his company still exists, is still running. And he's a rocket manufacturer for, for launching of low orbit satellites. But he doesn't use hydrazine. It's completely using inert polymers and oxidizers. And just from an environmental impact, that is huge. And his rocket is built because it's a hybrid engine. He can use it, has less parts, and he's 3D printing the parts. Like 10 years ago, that would have been unheard of doing something of that nature. So you hear these stories that are coming out from researchers around the world, and you just shake your head. Okay, this makes so much sense. How do we work with them to make sure they commercialize?
So let me kind of summarize then. On the IEEE side, you got engaged with, let's say the IEEE Computer Society, IEEE Technology Engineering Management Society. You got involved.
Robotics, power, energy. They have about 39 technical societies. Like the computer science society, like is in tens of thousands. The robotics, same thing. The power energy society, I believe there are 42,000 members. So we're working with all these societies to look at then how to bring entrepreneurship to their membership. And this year in October 28th and 29th, we're doing co-hosting our first Hard Tech Venture Summit with Georgia Tech in Atlanta. And with that summit, we're bringing in investors to invest in hard tech at the pre-seed seed level. And we're looking for hard tech startups at the pre-seed seed, and then connecting them with manufacturers. And what we want to do is make this event different than other events, is that we want to build those long-term relationships. So there's going to be roundtable discussions where the investor or a serial entrepreneur in the hard tech industry have roundtable discussions with these startup founders, because it's sharing the experience, learning from others, okay, and also to get the investors are engaged that, hey, these are the type of technologies we want to invest to in the future. And so we're looking to build this as our pilot for this year, and then the following year we're looking to do more in whether it goes to Asia Pac or other regions, and then each region decides what makes the most sense for you. When we work with Georgia Tech, they focus on hard tech because he said that is something that's lacking in the United States. And so Asia Pac may think of something else, and that could be different in India versus Thailand, let's say. And then in Middle East Africa, they started a series, but they're focused on AI. And that's the beauty of being global, is you adjust to the global reality. You act what's it? You think global, act local.
So IEEE Entrepreneurship, it's not a separate society or association. It looks like it's some kind of a council in a way, or something that.
Yeah, it's a community. It's a community of investors and entrepreneurs, and folks are in the startup community ecosystem, let's say. And so we work together of how to bring programming that's relevant to the region and relevant for the startup founders, to help them as much as possible. Because a lot of the challenges for startup founders is everybody says, I need access to money. That could come from government grants locally, and also access to investors. But the challenge is finding the hard tech or deep tech investors who invest at pre-seed seed level. And that I got the experience from Reds Capital, because Reds has invested at pre-seed seed level with deep tech companies. And so you start to see, okay, what were our challenges in helping our startups? So how can we help other startups so they be as successful as as Red startups?
So you're talking about hard tech, and that's your term for deep tech then? And can you give examples of hard tech?
Well, we termed it hard tech because we didn't want the software companies. So deep tech, by definition, is based on many years of research, and it has a hardware component, but not necessarily, because you can have AI and quantum computing companies as deep tech, but they have no hardware component to it, because they can use Microsoft Azure, AWS, and they develop the software component. While a hard tech, it's hardware based, but they will have software because it can't run by itself. But the challenge of building hardware, whether you're building a new chip, is that you have another element of it. because you got to understand the manufacturing cycle, the manufacturing product cycle. You got to understand the supply chain, the logistics of it. And it's not a matter of just giving, hey, here's my chip design to Global Foundry. It's much more complicated than that. And it's understanding to work with design work teams of how they go about doing it. And the other challenge is also to make sure, hey, you got these manufacturers that are local resources. Because Asia Pacific has built this tremendous powerhouse network of manufacturer. But if you're in the States or Europe, does it make sense to send your prototype and your first lot sizes to Asia, just from a distance perspective, if you can find them locally? So that's why we built this Hard Tech Venture Summit, is also to bring the local manufacturers into the portrait, so that the startup founders realize there is. Because we're also putting in and working with the Robotics Automation Society of IEEE, we're putting in a half-day design to manufacture workshop.
So a lot of people in the audience, they may be familiar with IEEE, but may not be familiar with its structure. So it's like it's getting close to 160 years old. It consists of sub-organizations, so like societies and councils and different constituents, which are separate organizations unto themselves, but they report to some kind of central headquarters. Can you give us a better idea how it's structured, and then how you're structured
works
in the entrepreneurship program?
Yep. So if you look at IEEE, it's a member-driven organization. So you got hundreds of thousands of members that choose which society to belong to, and usually that depends on their areas of interest. So if I was working for a utility company, I would probably belong to the Power Energy Society. Okay. And if I was working in the IT department, I could belong to the Computer Society. But if my IT department is in a utility company, I probably join the Computer Society and the Power Energy Society. And if I was doing stuff in robotics, I might join the Robotics Automation Society. So each member decides where they want to join, and they can join multiple societies. So each of these societies are entity upon itself within the IEEE umbrella. So you got the membership driven societies and also councils and communities. And then you also got about 1,000 staff members that are headquartered, a majority in New Jersey. And they help the society, since it's a member driven organization. Don't forget, the members are still working full time. And the staff who are full-time staff members of IEEE, they work with the societies to make sure programs are brought out to the program. So there's conferences built, publications that are done, and multiple events. So as someone that's new and say, hey, I like to join IEEE, what do I do? And I have to admit, the IEEE website is designed by engineers, so it's linear thinking, and so you join and you look and say, okay, which society I would like to join, okay, and so it depends on your areas of interest. So I joined basically the beginning with a fellow partner, Red's partner, Andy Chen, was a Technology Engineering Management Society, because it was based on project management, and that was my area of interest. And then eventually it morphed into, I'm still a member, but morph into the entrepreneurship, because I'm an investor with startups. So there's different affinity groups, communities, different entities that you can join and learn where you can benefit the most from.
So how many societies and councils are there in IEEE? And then entrepreneurship is not a society. It's not
It's a community. It's a community to serve the societies and the councils.
right. So how many?
And so there's probably about 50.
50.
So if you look at, there's probably, like, there's other communities. There's the young professionals. So by the nature of its name is, I think they're under 35 or 40, if I'm not mistaken. There's women in engineering. There's us entrepreneurship. There's even a society for sustainable technology. Okay, they're creating another one also for climate change. There's one that's coming up that it could be looking at ag tech. So it comes at, there's one that's coming up also. I just saw it. It's on metaverse. So it's on future directions. And, and so, because the technologies is always evolving, and IEEE is on top of the game and say, okay, there's something that's coming down the pipeline. We got to be involved, and where the members are interested, and we formed this ad hoc committee to build it up and start addressing, let's say, from a academic perspective, the industry perspective, and the government perspective, but always looking at it from a global basis.
I mean, you're very active too in the IEEE Quantum Week program, which
Right.
is Halsey Mueller is one of the founding principles behind it. I think he's chairing this year of
Yeah.
this. So tell us more about this quantum program that you're embedded in as well.
Yeah, so Quantum Week, it's been around now. I think, unfortunately, when they first had their first conference called Quantum Week, it was 20, 2020, 2020. It was just the onset of COVID, because everything shut down in March and their conference was in October. And so it's that iffy, right? And then eventually it went virtual. For its first 2 years, it was virtual. And its third year, it was live in Colorado. Last year, I think it was in Seattle. This year is coming in Montreal. And IEEE Entrepreneurship has always been involved since the beginning of doing one-day workshops of working with the attendees who are from industry and academia, and also government, on uh, on having panels, sessions on how to commercialize your research, on the thinking of a quantum investor, because it's not obvious. Because as a with a VC firm, you always got that 10-year period of the longevity of the fund. So how do you work it? Because quantum is quite futuristic. And so to have people come in and talk about that and the bridging and think everything that happens there. So it's to provide as much information as possible for those in the quantum world. And we've had people come in for the security, because everyone talks about how quantum will shake up the security world because, of passwords and everything of that sort. So it's looking at, it's kind of futuristic, but it's also there. And from there, we ended up working, helping up a startup. And his technology is based on quantum computing for, let's say, cargo planning in planes and ships, because mathematically, it's a very tough algorithms to do on existing today's computers, even with AI. But quantum resolves that, and he's been working with airline companies on numerous pilot projects on that. So it's interesting when you attend these IEEE conferences like Quantum Week and others, is you find these nuggets of gold of where these researchers have developed, and they've launched their startups from it.
And you're saying it's in Montreal, so that's going to be, I guess you're going to attend physically, right?
Yeah. There it'll be physically, yeah. And in the Montreal area, they have quite a huge community here, which is about not in Montreal, but it's in Sherbrooke, which is about, I guess, an hour and a half drive from Montreal. And they've developed a quantum center with researchers there from englobing, yes, it's local, but working with researchers across Canada. And their challenge now is workforce development. They don't have enough qualified skilled workers. When I say workers, I don't mean like an operator type, but the ones who are the software developers, the PhDs, the grad students of working in this field. And they already acknowledge we're not going to, for us to grow, we need more qualified people.
Yeah, and then Canada has that Discovery group and the Mars group. They have Waterloo. Uh,
Yeah.
Housey has courses at the University of Victoria.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
one of the founding, or probably is the founding chair of this Quantum Week program.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. And
And
he's done a lot of work of IBM also, bringing all this forth to the forefront. It's excellent.
yeah, it'd be interesting to talk to Housey about his, because it's in Canada, right? So it's kind of like a
Right.
natural.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a natural fit for of how Canada can be at the forefront, and probably in certain ways it is because of the work that Halsey has done.
Yeah, in fact, the Canadian Government Deep Tech Fund is invested in Xanadu, which is a Canadian photonics-based quantum computing company. In fact, it went unicorn, I believe, about 2 years ago now. So
Yeah.
it's interesting in valuation. So that's fascinating. You're involved in entrepreneurship, but you're also involved in this quantum week, which is really, really interesting, which is, really leading edge.
Yeah.
And I believe you're part of the system council board as well, or
Yeah, so that will start next year because my term in entrepreneurship will finish as chair this year, but I'll keep being chair of the conferences for IEEE entrepreneurship for another year. And then I guess I get phased in to the systems council, which is fascinating because then it brings me back to my element when I was working with SAP. Because I say, hey, from a systems perspective, no greater system than SAP. So it kind of say I'm moving forward, but then you're leveraging all the work experience you've did in the past that just enhances what you're doing and just keep on moving.
so what's the
So it
purpose?
never stops.
Because you're joining the system council next year. What's the purpose of the systems council? Tell us about the systems council.
So the systems council, if I look at it, it's a combination of, to me, it almost, it, it's anything to make, I look at it from an industry perspective, okay, of how the operations and the systems that make a company tick, what makes it work. So it could be from project management, it could be the ERP, all the planning, everything that makes today that you could not live without it. Like in the 1950s, you could have because everybody did everything manually. But now you're doing everything through computers. Okay. And how do you bring this about? And coming from entrepreneurship, and this is the element I'm going to be working on, is how do you bring the entrepreneurial spirit to the council? Hey, we got to be working with startups because there's so many enterprise systems that are being developed. And it doesn't mean someone's developing another SAP system, but they're developing innovation that these large corporations at SAP or Oracle are not, that haven't developed it, but it becomes an adjunct that improves on that. A case in point, I met a company out of in the States, but their development team is in Latin America from a cost perspective, and they've developed AI retail software to improve the barcode from a retail shelving maximization to get maximum dollar from a revenue perspective. So they developed that, but they're a strong SAP partner because they've integrated their system with SAP. So those are the things, nuggets I want to find and look at within system councils, because how do we improve the company's bottom line? And some of these innovations are coming. That's the way I look at it.
I mean, that's fascinating. You have so many different sort of initiatives underway. Because you're so tied into startups and entrepreneurship, and you're chairing the IEEE entrepreneurship program, you have your first global hard tech summit this year. I think it's at Georgia Tech as well.
Right. Georgia Tech, October 28th and 29th this year. Yeah.
And just some closing questions then. What do you think are the attributes that make for a successful team for a startup? And then what are some of the attributes of the startup itself that makes it successful? You would have a good picture of, what are those success metrics, right?
Yeah. So if you look at it, let's say one is the leadership of the founder. Okay. His passion of what he's doing.
Or him or her.
Him or her, sorry. Him or her or them.
Or them.
Okay. Or them. And what they're looking at, what they're doing, the passion that drives them forward, and how he can bring a team together. And you never want them to build, only hire people that are in their likeness, because you want the variety, because everybody has different skill sets. And recognizing that as a leader will prepare the company, and also recognizing what, as a CEO founder, what's your own limitations, and complementing those or supplementing those forces with others, because that's the only way how you can grow. And so you got the tech team, operations, You also got the legal from the IP and the finances, but it's how to bring all these elements together and how they grow. And when you look at the growth of a startup, because as a growth of a startup, maybe just one or two people or three, and then eventually it grows more. And how does that founder CEO grows? And that CEO founder can grow with it, or he say, "Hey, I'm going to take on this other role and find someone that's stronger, and we can propel it further ahead." So it's being able to be that great leader of knowing who you are, what you can do, and who you can bring in to grow the company.
You're also at the leading edge, as you mentioned, hard tech, but as the entrepreneurship program, some areas of the world are interested in deep tech and boundary areas, outlier areas like AI, which has now become more mainstream. Can you do a quick prediction of in the next 2 to 3 years? What are those things that you think are really exciting on the leading edge of innovation?
The leading edge of innovation. One, I'm still right now, just because of Moore's law and everything, we're maxing out and we're still continuing to max out our let's say the computer chips, right? And so from an investor perspective, the growth of the industry or the innovation is going to come from startups. It's going to be in the hard tech space or the deep tech space. Okay, it is not going to be just the pure software play of AI. It has to be the integration of that software, whether it's AI or quantum, with the hardware components brought in it. And it has to be multidisciplinary. Because if you look at the biotech field, it's no longer find that drug discovery of that new pill or therapeutic. It's also the tools that are there to develop the therapeutic and to advance let's say, the pharmaceuticals. Okay. So I'm not looking at from a technology perspective. I'm looking at it more from the integration and of the multidisciplinary facets of various technologies coming to the forefront to find that winner or that unicorn. And because of that, it's that CEO or the founder is more versatile and can understand the different matches and plays that needs to be done to make it happen. It's not going to be a singular thing.
So it sounds like, and you talked about this earlier, semiconductor technology, which is really interesting. They're using graphene now and carbon nanotubes, and definitely getting very small in terms of scale, small scale, like sub nanometer kind of, and then 3D stacking, or there's this new ferro RAM, but also resistive RAM. So all of that is really escalating, as you indicated. That's hard tech, but it's driving all of these innovations elsewhere, including even quantum computing. There's
Yeah.
chip
And
technology.
also the mineral elements too, right? Because there's more, let's say like before, let's say the standard was platinum, gold, silver type of thing, or let's say in a battery it's lithium, right? So it's the look from the innovation is coming from the different types of minerals that can bring you to the next level, and and so all those elements are coming together. So that's why I said it's not just one type of thing. Like everyone's talking about metaverse, right? Type of thing, and but that can't be just the only element of metaverse. There's more to it than that. What that is, I don't know, but it's probably the combination of metaverse with other stuff that's happening down the pipe.
Yeah, and then you're at the forefront with quantum technology, so quantum information technologies. And that's not just hardware, though. There's new quantum algorithms,
That's it.
and already there's niche applications which are showing great promise. So even before we get universal quantum computing, where you can scale to really very large capabilities and solve any sort of hard problem that is nature based or that sort of has this quantum element to it, we're already getting niche applications. I'm just thinking of the N quantum Monte Carlo simulation tech that Quantinuum is putting out there already and is showing some promise. So, and you're at the forefront of that. And you also talk about biomedical innovation, a lot of work being done there. David Sinclair had a piece in Time. Dime did a feature on him earlier, just a few weeks ago,
Right.
about aging, how they're looking at solving aging using Yamanaka factors, but not all four Yamanaka factors, but three, and then using some kind of antibiotic. I think it's doxycycline to sort of unlock its capabilities, and they're moving to primate study or to larger animal studies to see if it works. It looks like it works in like mice and so on. And AI machine learning, Microsoft just came out with this marvelous discovery, which is using elements of AI machine learning, but I believe quantum elements as well. And they found a novel way of doing battery technology, which using much less lithium than was used currently and things like that. So you're, as you mentioned, it's very interdisciplinary in this confluence of all of this. And you're at the forefront of this as well, because of
Oh yeah, no, IEEE see it at the forefront. So it's just amazing. Like you were talking about, let's say, discovering lithium, but if we look in the biotech field, I remember talking to a researcher, and she was at the forefront of heart transplants. And so, and since the first heart transplant of so many eons ago, it's been an evolution. Okay, and now she's looking of 3D printing a heart.
right,
So that's why I say, and that's a confluence of multiple elements that
right.
comes to there. Yeah.
So this is the last question, and what would be your recommendations to the audience?
It, it depends on the audience and what field they're in and everything that sort. So if we talk to the researchers, look at your research. Is it commercial? Is it going to help advance humanity? And if it does, let's look at it and see what can be done. Let's say from an industry perspective, hey, in industry, there's so much innovation that's happening. Keep your eyes and ears open to all these innovators that are coming through, especially the startup community. And and is it possible to integrate it into what you're doing so it improves your bottom line? And also that you're always at the forefront innovation to advantageously. From a government, your policy makes a difference. So I look at the policymakers of government is that how can you advance technology, and usually this come back to economic development and workforce development, and what can you do to set policies in place that each country, your respective country, is always at the forefront and the head of innovation.
Well, you definitely could speak with knowledge because you've been on the translational research side and working with translational researchers. And translational researchers, by definition, is taking research and translating it into workable solutions that you can scale globally. You've been definitely working on the policy side. You were on the sector council. So,
Right.
and on the startup side, you're an active investor. I mean, there's just you encompass very much this idea of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. So, Joanne, thank you for coming in.
I
Definitely,
thank you very much, Stephen. It's much appreciated having this conversation with you.
well, you're a global leader across dimensions. So, thank you for.
Hey, thank you so much. And thank you for doing this. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.